I think that most of you are under the wrong impression, and it's that floating shelves are time consuming and hard to make. And this couldn't be farther from the truth. I'll prove it to you. I'm going to show you a clever and simple way to make floating shelves, relatively quick and easy, step by step. Plus, I'll give you a couple tricks that will be useful not only for this project, but other woodworking projects as well. And all of this is made easy because of this right here.
The secret sauce.
Before jumping into anything, you need to decide how thick you'll be making your shelves. I'm going to make my shelves 2 inches thick. Not only does making them 2 inches look good, as you'll see, it will make the rest of the process a breeze. So with our shelf thickness figured out, we need to move on to the next step, which is to mill up some hardwood for the face of your shelf. I'll be making my hardwood 3/4 inches thick by just a little bit over 2 inches wide, which will be the thicknesses of our shelves. I went with 3/4 inch thick hardwood since it's a common thickness that most of you will be able to pick up at a lumber yard if you don't have the tools to mill down your hardwood yourselves. You don't have to stick with 3/4 inch thick hardwood. You could mill it down thinner if you so choose. However, I wouldn't go any thinner than 3/8 inch thick, and this will make sense in a little bit. But why go through the trouble of making a hardwood edge for your floating shelf versus something like a mitered edge? Well, let me explain. Now, one of the benefits of using a hardwood edge on your floating shelves versus a mitered joint in, let's say, a mitered floating shelf is that a solid hardwood edge is going to be a lot more durable and resistant to chips and nicks than a mitered edge. Also, a hardwood edge is going to allow you to put a profile on it, which might not be possible if you're doing a miter fold with, let's say, particle core veneered products. It just won't work. And the other fact of the matter is it can be a little more tricky to master the miter fold. Now, most of you will probably be ripping your width of your hardwood down in the table saw. However, I got to play with a new tool in the shop called an inline rip saw, which eliminates the need to use a jointer on one edge. All I had to do is line up one edge to clean it up and straighten it out, set my fence for the width I wanted, line it up, and let the conveyor belt pick up my board and let her buck. The boards came out nice and straight with a beautiful edge. One little tidbit of info you should know is when you're ripping your boards to the proper width, slightly oversize them by an extra 1/16. So if your shelf thickness is going to be 2 inches, go 2 inches plus a 1/16 or a couple extra millimeters, and you'll see why this is handy shortly. With our hardwood out of the way, it's time to move on to cutting our top and bottom for our shelves. For my shelves, I'm using 5/8 thick veneered particle core sheet material. I'm using this since it works perfectly for getting my shelves to the proper thickness, as you'll see, and also going above 5/8 inch thick material just adds extra weight that we don't need for our shelves. Now there's a sneaky little trick I like to use when cutting these out to get a nice tight fit against your hardwood. That will eliminate any need for filling any gaps and save some time later on the construction. The sneaky little trick is to set your saw on a slight angle when you're cutting your tops and bottoms so that when you fit your sheet material against your hardwood, you're going to have a nice tight fit and save yourself some work. And one final step we must do before putting these bad boys together is to rip up some 3/4 inch strips of plywood. It doesn't necessarily have to be plywood, it can be whatever, just as long as it's 3/4 inch thick in this case. These strips are going to be used to create a hollow space in your shelf to reduce some weight, allow for any wiring for any lighting, and to get us to our proper thickness. My tops and bottoms that I cut are 5/8 inches thick, plus if you add my 3/4 inch thick plywood, that's going to get me to 2 inches thick, which is where I want my shelves to be. So finally, after getting all our material ready, we're on the upswing to start putting our shelves together. And you'll start to see why this method is so quick and simple. So simple, in fact, I'm sure my 4-year-old could handle it.
Oh, thank you, bud.
I good.
You're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So to start with, you're going to take a little chunk of your top and bottom material, which is in this case 5/8 inch thick, and you're going to use that as a little spacer. And this will eliminate time of having to measure things out. You're simply going to take a little wood glue and put that on your strips. Take your spacer material, line that up on the top or bottom edge of your hardwood material, and just take a brad nailer and tack on your 3/4 inch strips in the middle of your hardwood piece. On the back side, I might add. Just be sure that your brad nails aren't so long that they're going to be poking out the face of your hardwood after you're done nailing it, which will create some headaches and have to remill up some hardwood. That's why, if you remember earlier, I said you don't want to mill your hardwood too thin. This is because you need a little meat or material for your brad nails to grab onto. So I wouldn't go any thinner than 3/8 inch thick hardwood in this case. Now with that out of the way, you're going to figure out your overall size of your shelf, both length and width, and you're going to cut your hardwood accordingly. So for every exposed corner on your shelf, you're going to miter your hardwood together at 45 degrees on the miter saw, or simply just cut your hardwood to fit around your top and bottom shelves that you already cut. And to get some nice crisp miters so that you don't have to do a bunch of filling, we're going to pre-glue them together. We're simply going to take a little CA glue and activator and glue those puppies together. Now with your top and bottom material, keeping in mind that we had tapered an edge in the table saw already, you are going to get those glued in place. Simply just take a little wood glue, glue along your plywood strips and along your front edge, and slip either your top or your bottom into that spot and clamp it. With that little taper we cut, it's going to keep us fitting nice and tight against our hardwood. The other plus with this method is you don't have any brad nails or fasteners going through the face of your piece that you need to fill. The other thing we're going to do is tack on some of those strips in the back and along the edges where you need them. However, there's one thing you got to keep in mind while doing this. Along the back, any strips you put back there, you should recess them back from the back edge so that you can fit a cleat in there for later. And same on the side edge if this is applicable, if you're going to be sliding your piece on a cleat. However, you can put it flush if you're just going to screw through, say, a cabinet and fasten it that way. Let that dry enough, flip it over, and do the same thing on the opposite side of your shelf. Now, one cool tip I'm going to give you for free is if you have any glue squeeze out, stop using water to clean off wet glue. It just smears this all over the place. It becomes hard to sand out, and it becomes a nightmare to finish, where you possibly have glue showing up and highlighted by your stain that you're putting on your shelf. I prefer to wait till it's not too wet and not too dry, kind of like a gummy texture, if you will. And that way I can just chisel it off, not smear it all over the place, and likewise not have to get a jackhammer to take it off. Makes it much easier. Now, as we discussed earlier, we made our hardwood a little thicker than the final thickness of our shelves, which means our hardwood's going to protrude slightly over one edge, which is exactly what we want. You do not want to risk making your hardwood any thinner than the final thickness of your piece, because when you go to sand anything with veneer, you're just going to sand through the veneer and ruin your shelf. So we simply move on to sanding. I just take a belt sander. I just sand the high edge of our hardwood off, being careful not to sand through any veneer, which is not too hard to do if you do it properly. And just do a final sanding of 150 grit or 180 grit, and then it's off to the finishing. In this case, I'm just putting a clear coat on maple, so I only need to sand to 180 or 150, and I just do a sealer coat and a clear coat. However, you can also stain them and then clear coat them. Totally up to you. And finally, we get to put these bad boys in place. In my scenario in this video, I got one edge that's going to be going against the wall and one edge that's going to be going against the cabinet. Earlier, I left a space for a cleat on the back edge that I'll be installing on the wall. I simply figure out where my shelves are going to be sitting, mark them on the wall and the cabinet, nice and level, screw my cleats into the studs on the wall or into any blocking that's already there, nothing fancy. And on the edge that's fitting on the cabinet, I simply just pre-drill where my shelf is going to be through the inside of the cabinet and buzz a screw in from the inside of the cabinet into the side of the shelf. And if you're worried about my cleats holding up enough weight and being sturdy for these shelves, well, as you can see, strong enough to hold up me. It's 190 pounds right there. And before you know it, you got some simple yet fine looking floating shelves that were stupid simple and easy to make. Well, hopefully after making it through the end of this video, you found some useful info. Drop a comment if it did, or let me know what you would do differently. You might even want to check out some of my other videos. I have lots of tips and tricks like how to stain these floating shelves I just made. And if you were to tap that like and subscribe button, that would be awesome. It means a lot. But most importantly, thanks for watching.